Let's get the latest from NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, and also with us, senior writer for The Dispatch, David Drucker, and former advisor to Speaker John Boehner, Maura Gillespie. Sahil, break down this news we just learned that could scramble this debate for Republicans.
Yeah, Anna, this is a significant setback for Senate Republicans and President Trump's one big beautiful bill. The Parliamentarian, which is the Senate's in-house referee, has disqualified a bunch of provisions from this piece of legislation, provisions that could total as much as several $100 billion in savings. These provisions that have now been ruled ineligible for this process include Medicaid cuts and eligibility restrictions on the basis of immigration status. It includes federal money to states based on how they run their eligibility process. It includes reimbursement rules for PBMs. And this is a big one, changes to Medicaid provider taxes, which is a major source of savings that Republicans have been eyeing in this bill. That is now knocked out. Another provision that has been removed, a funding restriction under the Affordable Care Act. If you add it up, there are a ton of savings here that have now been tossed out of this bill. Senate Republicans are going to try to reword some of these provisions to ensure that they comply with the rules, but it's not really clear how many of them they can cure. The Republican sources I've talked to this morning say this is not fatal to the bill. They remain optimistic they can get it done. They're going to try to adjust the language on some provisions. The one they're most worried about is the Medicaid provider tax because that gave them the biggest source of savings here. Now, Anna, they were hoping to start voting on this bill tomorrow. That has been thrown into further doubt because the bill clearly isn't ready for prime time as is.
And Sahil, just for perspective here, this isn't the first time the Parliamentarian has ruled against an administration's wishes. We saw this happen with President Biden and the Democrats, too, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We saw several of President Biden and Democratic priorities in 2021 and 2022 get knocked out of their reconciliation bills by the Parliamentarian. That includes a minimum wage increase. Remember Senator Kyrsten Sinema's famous thumbs down on the floor? That's what that was about. It also includes Democrats trying at the time to legalize the Dreamer population through the reconciliation process. That was ruled ineligible by the Parliamentarian. So she has been fair in terms of saying immigration policy changes that either party is trying to do in reconciliation are not valid.
So, Maura, this whole issue with the Parliamentarian aren't the only issues that Republicans have been grappling with. There's still the state and local tax deductions, also known as SALT, the rural hospital funding issues, deficit reduction issues. So if you are the Speaker or Senator Thune right now, how worried are you?
Well, you know, Senator Thune has already said that some Republicans in the Senate are coming around to the fact that the SALT tax needs to be dealt with, and they have to come around to the fact that that's something that is a non-negotiable for House Republicans to get this bill across the finish line. So there is some concessions being made as far as within the fractures that the Republican Party is facing. But you mentioned rural hospitals. I mean, that's a big issue for a lot of members. SNAP cuts is also a big issue for a lot of Republican members, as well as the Medicaid issues. And so John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, has just said that he is not planning to delay anything yet, but that these cuts, he's not going to push back at the Parliamentarian because he knows that it goes both ways, right? You can't just cherry pick when you decide that the Parliamentarian serves a purpose. And so I think that the Senate Majority Leader knows that. But it's this self-imposed deadline is really their own making. They don't need to push it this weekend, but we'll see what happens in that regard.
And so thus, as you point out, if they don't do it before this weekend, it's not like there are some kind of major consequence, although they might face the wrath of the president. Right. That would be the consequence for the party. Multiple provisions concerning Medicaid funding, as we mentioned, David, were struck down. The other issue with that is they were key in paying for Trump's tax cuts. So if the GOP can't get funds from there, where do they turn?
Yeah, really good question. I think one thing to understand is, except for a few budget hawks, nobody really cares about whether or not you're able to pay for this. They don't care about the deficit consequences. They're interested in the pro-growth tax cut aspect of this. That's how they look at taxes, as very pro-growth and stimulative to the economy. They also look at this just politically as how they're going to deliver most of their 2024 campaign promises, because there's not much else they're going to do between now and the midterm elections, at least not really of consequence when you look at the border provisions and the tax and spending provisions that are rolled up into this reconciliation package. So I don't think it's the deadline that's that important because they do have plenty of wiggle room here. I'd look at the August recess as more of a deadline. But Sahil, knows this more, knows this. If you don't give these guys false deadlines, they don't feel any sense of urgency to get anything done. And I think that's why they've been pushing for this July 4th thing to happen. And look, never underestimate a politician's ability to explain how the policy they opposed is not actually the policy they're opposing, and therefore they found a way to support it.
I get what you're saying there, David. Well done. Sahil, we've heard from Congressman Greg Steube now calling on the vice president to overrule the parliamentarian. That's something Senator Thune has vowed he would not do, but he could fire her, something Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville is now calling for. Is that something you could see him doing?
There is no indication at this time, Anna, that Senate Republicans are considering either overruling the parliamentarian or firing the parliamentarian. This gets dangerously close to nuking the filibuster, which both parties have been poking holes in for quite a long time. Remember, they're using this process to get around the filibuster, and the more you stretch it, the more you try to disregard or try to get around some of the rules that limit what you can do in the filibuster-proof process, the more you have to answer the question, why do you want the 60-vote threshold to begin with? So Senate Majority Leader John Thune has promised to protect that 60-vote threshold, but it is a tradition among members of the House to start throwing grenades over at the Senate.
Just talking point for a number of Republicans. It's going to be it's going to make for an interesting afternoon, where at the White House there's going to be this huge messaging pitch where they're trying to sell this bill to the American public, all while both Senate and House Republicans are really bickering over a number of these policies. It can make it really difficult.
And there's so much. This bill, we call it a Megabill, a policy bill, because there's so many issues and just a handful of them. Not only would it extend the 2017 tax cuts permanently, business and individual tax cuts, which would cost trillions of dollars, but also new work requirements on social safety net programs, dealing with no taxes on tips and overtime, phasing out those Biden-era green energy tax credits, money for the Pentagon, hundreds of billions of dollars for the Pentagon, border security, and the like, and then raise the debt ceiling, the Senate plan would, by $5 trillion. And then, but there are the sticking points. The Medicaid cuts are sticking points, how to deal with state and local tax deductions. That is a huge fight that could actually derail the bill in the House. And then phasing out the tax credits of those Freedom Caucus members that Mariana was talking about, they want those out immediately. Senate Republicans, not so sure. There are so many issues. But here's my question. You cover the White House. Yep. Trump is demanding this by July 4th. There is no reason for this to be done by July 4th other than the fact that he wants to just have it done by July 4th. Will he be open to delaying this past July 4th?
We have seen him, move the goalposts, in situations like this before, particularly when something is going through Congress like this. But the sense of urgency is also rooted in that this bill has so many things in it, but also it has funding for some major parts of his domestic policy agenda, right? Money for immigration enforcement and those mass deportations. That's this bill. Also, a lot of provisions just to zoom out that impact his supporters as well. When you talk about Medicaid, when you talk about SNAP benefits, not only does it expose different fissures in the Republican Party, but also when you talk about the funding that he needs to accomplish many things that he campaigned on, that's also this bill. I'm also interested, just in terms of this White House event today, I'm going to be there going to that event, how much actually he uses this moment to push for this bill and not for some of the things that we talked about in the previous segment as well, maybe criticizing the media coverage as well. But look, they want this thing to be pushed. They're feeling the sense of urgency. We don't often see an effective pep rally at the White House for a bill that still we don't know what's going to be in it.
They're gambling that, or they're betting, the Republican leadership is, that Trump's pressure campaign will be effective and that these members don't want to endure his wrath by voting against it. But this bill is just not popular to the public because the Republicans have not sold it effectively to the public. Just as one poll, this has been consistent with other polls as well, just 38% of the public favor this plan, in part because people really don't understand what's in it. They call it a big, beautiful bill, but what's in it? And the members themselves, if they have to vote on this by this weekend or next week, they wouldn't even have time to read it either.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a caveat and say, depending on what passes, some of what I'm about to say might change. Okay, but we are all understandably in the weeds. If you're covering this, you need to know exactly what's in it, what the parliamentary situation is, all that stuff. If you're a member of the public and you're thinking, why should I care about this? One of the big selling points that the president and his team are going to make, that Republicans will make, is tax cuts, because everybody likes the sound of a tax cut. But what the early analysis have shown is that if you're kind of in the middle band of Americans, you're earning maybe, I think, up to about $120,000 or less, this is going to mean $1,000 in your pocket over the course of a year. It's about $40 per paycheck $40 for $4 trillion in deficit spending. And so, and if you're lower income, if you're $50,000 or below, this might net you $300 in tax cuts per year. So about $1 a day, less than $1 a day. But will reduce your accessibility to Medicaid and social welfare provisions. And so one of the big political questions, if this passes, the reason the president wants it to pass is so he can show he can get things done. Because one thing we hear again and again from centrist voters as well as base voters is you might not like everything Donald Trump does, but he's getting stuff done. But the flip side is the minute this thing passes, if it passes, you're going to have a massive messaging campaign where critics of the president are going to be saying, this was a wealth transfer to wealthy people away from people with less money, and it reduced the safety net of people who rely on these services.
And that's going to be the debate as we head into the midterms. It's going to define the entire midterm elections when and if this does pass. The question is when it passes, if it does.
If it passes, when it passes.
The real deadline is really before the August recess because they need to do something to avoid a debt default by probably the middle of summer and early fall. And there's that debt limit increase that's in the bill. So we'll see if Trump agrees to delay his own self-imposed deadline.
What we have here fundamentally is that Donald Trump isn't as powerful as he was. His bill is deeply unpopular. It goes against his own campaign. And the GOP are full of too many dum-dums that even procedurally they're struggling to shepherd this bill through. Look, it showcases that Trump doesn't have the full cult-like grip that he would like to. Yes, MAGA is still a cult. Yes, the GOP is largely MAGA, so it is largely a cult. But Donald felt he would have literally no resistance this presidency. He felt like, for example, you would never protest. That No Kings protest, one of the biggest protests of the last, 40 years, right? Really, probably? It's probably not the biggest in American history, but if it isn't, it's close, right? I don't know. He didn't think that was going to happen. He didn't think Democrats would ever oppose him in Congress. They haven't done as much as they could in some cases, but they've been doing some. And he certainly felt Republicans wouldn't stand up to him. And what's happened here is he has divided his own base. Because what Trump actually is, which is a billionaire who hates the poor and wants to give tax cuts to the rich while you die in the street, that part of the GOP thinks the bill isn't cruel enough. But there are a few people in the GOP who actually believe that Trump cares about the working class, that actually believe that he's not a Mitt Romney, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, let's slash Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, because that's what those people believe, right? That he was different from those people because he said he was different. And now you have people like Hawley who's sort of staking out a kind of populist position saying, well, I oppose it because I don't like these cuts to healthcare because it hurts rural communities. And he's not wrong, even if he's disingenuous. He's not wrong. And so Trump's bill is failing because he doesn't understand his own MAGA coalition. And it will fail when it goes back to the House, too.